Book it.
I'm not as well read as I'd like to be. There's just no time to read.
If you're like me, you're always on the go.
And then there's always so much work to do. Either I'm busy cooking dinner, or I just have no grade. Even hard finding time to reflect, pray, and meditate.
Follow me to find your next read. Adult story time for professionals.
Book it.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Adult Story Time for Professionals. I am your host, Ramela Janine El Karzezi, PhD in IO Psychology, BA in Economics, and this book we're touching on this week actually is more on the economic side of things. Simple Money. No Nonsense Guide to Personal Finance by Tim Maurer. If you've never watched Adult Storytime for Professionals before, what I do is I pick one book and I spend about 30 minutes talking about the book. I share excerpts from the book and my reactions to those excerpts. I don't give a thumbs up or thumbs down to the book. Instead, at the end, I give an indication if whether or not I will try to work it into my busy schedule, if I can say the word busy. As a professional, there's only so much time we have, and so we have to pick and choose about how we spend our discretionary time, discretionary income, discretionary time, wink, wink. And on the back, let's see what we have. That's why what works great for someone may not work as well for you. Money management is complex because we are complex. Therefore, it is in better understanding ourselves, our history with money, and what we value most, that we are able to bring clarity even to the most confounding decisions in money and life. Tim Maurer has made a career out of demystifying complex financial concepts into understandable, doable actions. In this practical book, he will show you to, first, find contentment by redefining wealth. Second, establish your priorities, articulate your goals, and find your calling. Third, design a personal budget system that you can almost enjoy. Create a simple world-class investment portfolio that has beaten the pros. Manage risk with and without insurance. Ditch the traditional concept of retirement and plan for financial independence. Cheat death and build a legacy, and so much more. All right, in that little bit, the first two things kind of resonated with me because back in 2011, I hosted a workshop on work-life balance at the National Press Club. And what I basically shared with the attendees at my workshop was the whole notion of getting clear on what your values are so that you basically understand how you should be spending your time. And it makes sense that that concept of what you value would dictate how you spend your money. So, so far I can, I'm there with Tim. All right, so here's some of the endorsements. Straightforward, candid, and yes, simple. That is Jean Chatzky, financial editor of NBC's Today Show, so that's a good one. I'll read another one. Carl Richards, New York Times columnist, author of the One-Page Financial Plan, a director of investor education at the BAM Alliance. I don't know what BAM Alliance is, but okay. He says, amen, amen, amen. Simplicity is a gift. And this book offers it by the truckload! Exclamation point. So here we've got a little overview of Tim. Tim Maurer is a speaker, blogger, and author, and financial advisor. As a wealth advisor and director of personal finance for Buckingham and the BAM Alliance, a collective of over 140 advisory firms serving over 19,000 individuals throughout the United States. He serves as an industry leader to media and an educator to both consumers and financial advisors. He is a regular contributor to CNBC, Forbes, Time/Money, and on his own website, timmore.com. He lives in Charleston, South Carolina. All right, so one thing that just kind of jumps out at me is I probably need to look more into this BAM Alliance just for my own education. So, all right, that's our first little kind of takeaway from this is what is the BAM Alliance? All right, so the contents. We've got part 1, planning for life. Part 2, planning for today. Part 3, planning for the inevitable. Part 4, planning for the unexpected. And part 5, planning for action. So within each of those, here are some simple things. So planning for life. 3 questions to guide you. Finding life-giving work. And time, investing your most precious commodity. That is what adult story time for professionals is all about, helping you figure out what's worth your time. Part 2, again, planning for today. It is basically taking stock of where are you, where do you stand, what are some essentials, straight talk on saving and debt. Part 3, planning for the inevitable, is investing, education, retirement, and estate and legacy, which is basically the cheating death part. Part 4, planning for the unexpected, insurance, of course. Life harder than it needs to be. Isn't that the truth? All right, Tim. You got me interested so far. Disability income, long-term care, and home and auto. Don't overpay or be underinsured. I bundle everything, and I do seem to get some pretty good discounts doing the bundling thing. So I wonder what he says about bundling. Not certain that we'll get to that part, but because as I do, I just kind of flip randomly through and read where I land. Part 5, planning for action. The top 10, your next dollar's home. That sounds interesting. Behavior management, working with an advisor, and simplicity. The one-page financial plan. Alrighty. It says start here. Okay, so we'll play along and start here. You cannot overestimate the unimportance of practicality in everything. That is a quote from John Maxwell. You may have heard of the 80-20 rule. It is also known as the Pareto principle. I'm tongue-tied. Named after the 20th century Italian economist who noticed that 80% of the peas in his garden came from only 20% of the pea pods. While the 80-20 rule is not a cosmic absolute, it persists in money and business, and especially in the business of money. For centuries, the financial industry has sought to hoard proprietary information for the purpose of selling it at a premium. But as the information age collided with the financial collapse of 2008 and the subsequent Great Recession, an entirely new problem appeared. And now everyone's a financial expert. So let me just post up and remind myself when this book was actually published, because I thought this was new. It is. It came out in 2016, late 2016, so all right. Yeah. The pursuit of money is nothing short of its own religion, and rather than move toward simplicity, its scores of paths have become painfully circuitous. Shifting through the plethora of information from an industry with questionable intentions and a blogosphere with questionable credentials, isn't that the truth? We're left echoing T.S. Eliot, Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? That's a good quote. I don't think I'd ever heard that. I wonder what book that's from, but okay. Simple Money strives to cut through the noise, providing at least 80% of what you need to know about personal finance with under 20% of the information and investment in time. The chaotic financial world simplified. This leaves you with a decision. If you prefer to live on the hairy edge of financial insanity, this book might not be for you. But if something in you yearns for a simpler financial existence, a more comprehensible plan, or an achievable financial to-do list, this book was written for you. This short introduction lays the groundwork, beginning with 4 fundamental tenets that link each of the book's 5 parts. All right, so the first tenet is personal finance is more personal than it is finance. This is not a clever tagline, but a statement of fact rooted in science. In psychology, yes, but also in biology. The proof is everywhere. This is why people who make $1 million a year live paycheck to paycheck, and why underpaid teachers retire with millions in savings. This is why investors make a fraction of what their investments return, and this is why consumers entrust their life savings to salespeople who buy them fancy dinners. This is also why the first part of this book is dedicated to planning for life. One of the ways we can make financial decisions financial decisions simple is to genuinely understand what motivates us. These motivations are too often separated from our financial planning, even though they are the foundation. Okay, that's great. Tenet number 2. We need to know why. Simon Sinek reminds us what really motivates people to action in his popular TED Talk, How Great Leaders Inspire Action. And in his book, Start With Why. People don't really listen to what you tell them to do or how you do it until they understand why it's important. Little interesting aside, I actually had the opportunity to see him speak. He was invited to speak, I believe, maybe like 4 years ago, maybe more, at the Treasury Executive Institute. And it was a pretty interesting talk. It really was. The financial industry is notorious for berating people with an onslaught of what's and hows. I follow Sinek's example and begin every chapter telling you why you need to read it. Okay, that's great. Tenet 3, simple, not simplistic. Even that which I've deemed the minimum effective dose of personal finance might feel overwhelming at times, especially if the subject matter is new to you. I'm sure there will be times when you think, ugh, this doesn't exactly sound simple to me. Please take heart, it's part of the plan. All right. And then under that section, he has how to use this book, like a separate little section. This book endeavors to provide a comprehensive overview of personal finance. It certainly won't touch on everything. For example, instead of a chapter on taxes, I discuss taxes throughout when appropriate. But the comprehensive scope means some sections will be more applicable than others to you. Therefore, here's how I recommend you approaching this book. Part 1 is required reading. Part 2 will be beneficial for everyone, but especially for those who wonder where they stand financially. Once you get to parts 3 and 4, if your attention is prone to wander or if you have areas of special interest, you shouldn't be lost by going out of order. Take a glance at the chapter headings for topics of your choice. Okay. All right, and tenet 4, enough is enough, is the old Shaker song lyrics. It is, as the old Shaker song lyrics say, A gift to be simple, but simplicity is not an end in itself. It is the vehicle to something much more meaningful and something very difficult to find in a financial landscape dominated by information overload and the emotions of fear and greed. That is the place of enough, and that is where we begin. All right, planning for life. Personal finance is more personal than finance. Chapter 1, Enough, Redeeming Wealth. Why do I need to read this chapter? How much money is enough? When I asked this question, the richest American at the time, John D. Rockefeller, when asked this question, the richest American at the time, John D. Rockefeller Sr. responded, just a little bit more. Who's greedy? More is a disease that infects regardless of the level of our assets. If we put Rockefeller's quote within the context of his life and other quotes, it doesn't appear that it was a lust for money he hoped to satisfy, nor a quest for material security he hoped to gain through his wealth building. Indeed, he also said, I know of nothing more despicable and pathetic than a man who devotes all the hours of the waking day to the making of money for money's sake. All right, so maybe a little bit more complicated than I just gave him credit for. Okay, we'll see. So it just wasn't about the money for him. Perhaps the real problem with Rockefeller's relationship to money lay in his interesting quote, a belief of his corroborated by other similar Rockefeller ruminations. Quote, I believe it is a religious duty to get all the money you can, fairly and honestly, to keep all you can, and to give away all you can. Yep. Alrighty. Skipping ahead. What is the American dream? Tim Meeks is a mid to upper level business director. He, his wife Joy, and their children represent the prototypical middle-class American family on the cover of Kiplinger's Personal Finance magazine. But there's more to their story. In the early 2000s, when home ownership seemed to be the smartest financial move to make, Tim got a touch of real estate fever. He successfully parlayed his hunger for more into a small home flipping and rental property business, doubling his net worth in 1 year and validating his dream of retirement as a 30-something. And then the market turned violently. In a matter of months, hundreds of thousands of dollars of his family real estate riches had vanished, along with everything else his family had ever saved, unbeknownst to Joy. Tim admitted to his wife that they had over $1 million of unsupportable debt. They both had to claim personal bankruptcy, disgrace, failure, their darkest hours. Today they rank that experience among the most important of their lives. They now define wealth not by how much they have in assets, but how little they have in debt. You know, I am debt averse. I am. My thing that I think about is I don't want to owe anybody. So that makes sense to me. It's like, you can have a lot of stuff, but if you have a lot of debt, can you really breathe? So, yeah. Since the bankruptcy, they rented an affordable home, paid off all surviving loans, and repaired their credit sufficiently to buy a new home. 5 years to the month after claiming bankruptcy. That's a little bit of karma. The peace they found through hitting bottom has entirely changed their view of what really is enough. Enough is a relative term, but Pete, aka Mr. Money Mustache, has taken it to the next level. A capitalist and investor, he has rewritten the modern-day version of the middle-class American dream. Pete decided he wasn't satisfied saving the requisite 10% of his income in his 401k. Even 20% was too little. An engineer by trade, he crunched the numbers. If he could save 50% of his income starting at age 20, he could retire by age 37. If he could save 75%, His full-time career would be a measly 7 years. With little deviation from that path, and just in time for the birth of their first son, Mr. and now Mrs. Money Mustache retired, not into extravagance, but into enough, at the age of 30. Alhamdulillah. Wow. But I wonder, did Mr. Money's mustache have to pay his own way through school? I wonder about that. If school was taken care of for him, it's like he kind of started out with an advantage. Those of us with student loans know what I'm talking about. Anyway, skipping ahead a little bit. The problems with SMART goals. The SMART goal setting system requires that a goal must be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and tangible to be valid. I have both subscribed to this regime and taught a similar version of it. The SMART system is the goal-setting standard, the rarely questioned convention, but despite its acronymic ring, it misses the mark. Why? In short, it is unnecessarily restrictive. It limits our imagination, constricts our potential, and drains our inspiration. Do you remember our brain dissection in Chapter 1? Differentiating between the rational, logical thinking brain and the instinctive, subconscious, emotional brain? No, we skipped that part, but you could go back to it if you decide to read the book. The emotional brain makes up 90% of our decisions. Meanwhile, SMART goals are speaking only to our thinking brain, ignoring the brain that is often driving the ship. All right, we'll skip. Okay, there's a little diagram here. Let me share that. So it's in this circle. It has arrows going around. I enjoy this. I really enjoy this. I love this. I was made to do this. All right, so this is the elephant piece. And then this is second nature. I'm starting to master this. I'm getting even better at this. I'm good at this. All right, and that's the rider. And then, as you move this way, you get closer to the line. As you move this way, you get closer to the line. And let's see what this says about this. When we begin to master an activity that is self-selected, the elephant and rider begin to work surprisingly well together. The elephant is satisfied because it's doing what it wants to do. The rider is able to appreciate the positive outcome. The rider begins to channel the elephant's brawn to even greater effect, creating a circular cycle of proficiency. Everybody's happy. All right, so there's a little call-out box here. And that box on page 46 says, Profit as Purpose. You may not be aware that in the corporate realm, there is an ideology insisting that profit is purpose. That a corporation can do no greater good for itself, its shareholders, and society than to profit, which will presumably create jobs, stimulate the economy, and build wealth. This is surprising. This is precisely the willful intellectual blindness that led to the financial crisis of the late 2000s. This is hogwash. Profit is a good thing, but profit is not purpose. It's purpose fuel. Profit is purpose fuel. Okay, that one, that's an interesting point. That's an interesting point. All right, danger zone, Archer reference. We didn't want to, and it's actually here, the danger zone. We didn't want to stifle the creativity of our emotional brain at the onset of this chapter with the rigidity of SMART criteria. We needed the freedom of autonomy to tap into our drive mechanism, our source of motivation, supported by our unique giftedness. Okay. And then it goes on to say we can borrow from some of the smart things. Let's skip ahead a little bit. Part 2, planning for today. Debt index. The second number we will use to gauge your financial health is more of a red flag. It's the amount of revolving unsecured consumer debt that you owe that won't be paid off at the end of the month. And yes, I made up this acronym, so it's RUC, Rook. It's revolving debt as opposed to an installment debt. An installment debt has a set number of payments after which the debt will be paid in full, such as home mortgages. Most home mortgages are installment debt, as are most auto loans and student loans. Conversely, most credit cards are lines of credit that, like flesh-eating zombies, he writes here, limp into perpetuity until you annihilate them. You'll have a minimum payment that adjusts according to the amount of outstanding debt and is primarily designed to keep you in debt. That is the truth. In Islam, one of the things that a good Muslim doesn't have is this kind of debt. It's a horrible thing. Oh wow, time is flying. All right, so that's the buzzer. Let me turn that off. All right, so we've been discussing Simple Money by Tim Maurer, and I think there's some good stuff in this book. I think even though you might already be responsible with money, like I'm a fairly responsible person with my money, I'd be curious to know what other sorts of ideas are in this book. I'm bummed we didn't get to the life is harder than it needs to be. And then he talks about, why do I need to read this chapter? The probability that you will die in this lifetime is high, really high. The probability that you die prior to retirement age, however, is quite low. So anyway, I'm wondering, like, what would he say in this, the purpose of life insurance? Going through some things that, if you have life insurance, you already know what these things are, but having those things explained in a simple way might be really good for someone who hasn't thought about these things before. For me, I probably will give this book a flip through. I don't think I'll read word for word, but I do find it to be an interesting book. And so this is Simple Money by Tim Maurer. And thank you so much for watching this episode of Adult Storytime for Professionals. See you next time. Bye-bye.